Ready? You can't see my face here. Push it. Ah, okay, now you can. Ah, fantastic.
Now we know how Mithrun drinks.
Yeah.
So what's the
The goals of the liberal left are fourfold, right? Number one, they're oftentimes the individuals that care about the lowest common denominators, because that is intrinsically what it means to be a progressive. The individuals that are suffering due to the instances of the birth lottery and people you care about the most because they don't deserve to be in those sort of positions. That's characterized who these progressives are. Three key examples. Number one, they're oftentimes made up of the elite. So this is important because you have to recognize this elite also in control of corporations, because these corporations are oftentimes US dominated. Corporations like L'Oreal, corporations like Navy that are existing within the Philippines, their CEOs and their managing directors are forced, at the very least forced to be liberal, because that is what the US needs in terms of marketing. Secondly, they also have the largest amount of wealth possible. The reason why they're liberal is oftentimes because they could afford to go to universities like Ateneo or UPLB, and they oftentimes get education. That's when they recognize that everything is not black and white, and that the needs of the people on the ground are also very important. And since they are the most educated, they can make sort of rational decisions. What are their goals long term? Their goals are oftentimes to emancipate people in poverty. Why? Because they recognize an important caveat here. It is not because these people are bad that they are drug dealers or drug addicts. It's oftentimes they're the people that are closest to those sort of problems, and that's why they need the most amount of help, right? So we tell you that these people within the poor don't recognize this themselves, and we're better able to make them recognize this, as it is the goal of the progressive to emancipate the people as a whole. What would we have them do? Three key things. Number one, you cease all sorts of payment of taxes whatsoever. Secondly, if you are the head of your corporation, say CEO, shareholders, and managing directors, you will force also your corporations to stop paying tax to the Duterte government. Thirdly, we're also very happy for you not to buy any sort of Filipino products. You like subscribe to more duty free and go to Blue Tax when you're at the airport to give back the tax. We're happy to do it across the board as much as you can. What will we do with this funding? This is very important. This is mutually exclusive on our side. So even if options they can do it, we can do it better. Two key things. Number one, with the money that we're able to get from all these sort of seizing of funds, we are happy to open up rehabilitation clinics and help for people on the ground and give them some sort of social safety blanket. Secondly, we are also happy to emancipate media. Companies like the Raptor, which are liberal-leaning news agencies, oftentimes are struggling under the Duterte regime because of the lack of funds. Now that we have more funds to be able to be spent, we're happy to put that in that direction. Two key issues. Number one, where will the poor suffer more? Because the biggest attack that will come from the op is the poor will oftentimes face the brunt of the sort of tax evasion, right? Why do we say no? Number one, what is Duterte's incentive? So now you have to evaluate this on a basis of probabilities. We tell you that his support base is oftentimes made of the poorest of the poor, and he ran on a campaign that he promised to emancipate these people. That is why, on a basis of probabilities, he is more likely to stop that squad, to stop the police from policing these areas so heavily. Why is he more likely to do this? Number one, it is oftentimes cheaper because the nature of buying guns and training people that are getting ready for death oftentimes require higher payments than a social worker giving you a band-aid, right? So we think on a basis of probability that is a significantly cheaper thing to do. But secondly, what also happens when you have less money in the budget? Number one, you will lose the backing of other politicians within your own cabinet because they would not be able to receive the same amount of funds as they could. You'll also lose the backing of police and the army because they don't also receive the same amount of funds. What does this mean at an end goal, right? That the death squad is no longer able to fire as many bullets or put as many people on the ground to harm the poorest of the poor that are oftentimes the most victimized in this drug war. That is a moral decision for the progressives to make because there is an outcome that favors them. But secondly, why is it less likely to cut off social welfare? Because the first reason, which I told you, is because they are his majority support base, right? So if you evaluate the election, a lot of the liberals, the people that are within like areas of the capital, oftentimes voted for people like Lenny Robredo, but it was the people in the area, the islands around the states that aren't as economically mobile or economically enfranchised that support him, right? But secondly, there's also historical analysis that shows you that politicians that oftentimes cut the sort of funding to the poor and the social welfare that they provide them oftentimes get rebelled against. Like the reason why Marcos was so the reason why we were able to topple down Marcos was because the poor banded together and took him down. This is the sort of scenario that would happen to Duterte if he chose to attack the poor first. Secondly, the emancipation of the people, right? We agree, and this is another clash that will come out from the opposition bench, that the poor actually want this. That they want the war on drugs because they believe that it is cleaning out the system. Two key things. Yeah, go ahead, what's up?
But wouldn't that mean if Duterte cuts off the social welfare, wouldn't more people blame the liberal left because now they know that they're not...
Correct. Fantastic. This is my second issue, right? So now, there's obviously a pinch that is felt by the poor, right? And that's when they start asking questions. Why is this happening? So right now, they're consumed by the majoritarian media, which is like ruled by Duterte's cronies, to make sure that the painting of these drug wars is successful and always on his side. We think we're better able to question that sort of narrative at worst, but at best topple the narrative, and we're able to provide these sort of statements that CEOs and the sort of ability for that to channel into the lowest common denominators areas are much easier. Why so? Because we're happy to fund the news agencies like Raptor, which are progressive. And when with more funding, they have more ambit. They're able to go into these areas and question the narrative, is this drug war really working? Because if they can prove to you that this drug war, number one, is not working, and the only way they can do that is if they have access to the screens or the access to the papers that are circulated within the area, it begins the poll starting to question, was this a really successful venture? Most often than not, if that questioning begins, they will recognize that the only way that they can get back to a basic decent living is if they topple Duterte themselves. Because like the next election is pretty far away, right? And considering that they have to live severely shitty conditions of life if Duterte remains in power, because that is what the liberals will start saying, right? If Duterte steps down, we will give you back your money. If Duterte steps down, you can get back your education, your welfare, and whatever you wanted. So with that sort of trade-off in mind, we think that the poor are oftentimes more likely to forego the drug battle because that is something that is a bit like out there to them. It doesn't directly harm them or affect them as much as compared to something that is within their very own perimeter, right? Which is stuff like their kids getting food or the things like if they're sick and they go to a clinic, right? Because they need those immediate amenities to be returned to them. We tell you that they're more likely to come up in arms against Duterte instead of standing with him and to continue a battle with the progressives that oftentimes endanger them and harm them the most. Ladies and gentlemen, what have we successfully proven to you today? Number one, we told you that yes, we agree. On both sides of the house, the poor will always feel the brunt of either attack. But we tell you that if you could tangibly quantify it, the suffering that the poor go through on the op with the despots is far significantly more than the lack of social welfare. But even in our worst case scenario, we inherit the harm, that it will become that bad. We think that the poor will oftentimes recognize that the only way that they could get back to some level of decency in living is to toppling the system.
Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition.
Right, Mr. Speaker, let's be very clear. When you pay tax, your duty is not to the current existing government. Your duty is to your nation. This means that as a taxpayer, especially as an informed taxpayer, which is what these progressives are, your primary duty is not to make sure that whatever existing government there is, right, continues to perpetuate. Your primary duty is to make sure that you do what is best in the interest of the common people. So insofar as we prove that the interests of the common people are bettered by not paying tax than by paying tax, that would mean that not paying tax would be a better alternative than to paying tax, right? Now, how is it that like not paying tax is actually more beneficial than paying tax, right? Firstly, are all the harms that will accrue that opening opposition talked about going to happen, right? First off, the idea of like, companies being shut down, corporations being shut down because of presidential clamping or government clamping means that jobs will be lost, right? That's not true. The reason why that's not true is because corporations, these people who are in charge of these corporations actually have tons of money. This means that in a civil suit, if you want to clamp down on a corporation, that would take an incredibly long amount of time because we have the kind of lawyers and the kind of necessary legal aid to just continue fighting, right, indefinitely. This means that it's not going to just shut down immediately, right? This means that jobs aren't going to be like almost just lost. That's not going to happen, right? But secondly, right, and this is more important, what is Duterte's priority right now? Is Duterte's priority really to create like what's free social welfare and free education, etc., etc.? Yes, he runs on a platform to poor people, but that's not, and that has never been the focus of his campaigning or his policies, right? And there is no reason to believe that it is going to continue to become, or that is going to become the focus of his policies. Instead, the way in which he maintains his hold over the poor people and the way in which he maintains a stable voter base with that poor people is by constantly running the rhetoric that, like, I will clamp down on crime, right, in these tough crime neighborhoods. I'll clamp down on drugs in these like tough drug neighborhoods, right, etc., etc. This is problematic because this means that his focus is not on providing welfare, but rather on engaging in what he considers to be the best deterrent force. Sit down, right? But what does he consider then to be the best deterrent force? That's where you have the employment of like indiscriminate police forces, the employment of like indiscriminate death squads, right? We think that the only way in which we can starve that, the only way in which we can prevent that from happening is by not having those funds in the first place, right? Now, what then happens as a result of not having those funds in the first place, right? Two things, right? First off, what happens is that, of course, the starving off happens. But secondly, even if Duterte were to engage in clamping down on healthcare first, right? Not maintaining infrastructure first, then we think that that will create a pinch amongst the poor, right? That will lead to them realizing that they are not that Duterte doesn't actually have their best interest at heart. Because push come to shove, he's more likely to prioritize the death squads as opposed to the infrastructural maintenance, right? Now, the problem under status quo would be that that narrative would be spun by Duterte because he has a monopoly effectively over the media. He has generated a media monopoly, right? What does that mean? That means to say that he can spin that and say, oh, it's because those rich people are not paying tax that y'all don't have health care, right? Like if you were to pay your health care as well, they're trying to attack me and instead they're attacking you. That's why it's important that our taxpayer money, right, our money that we would have used to pay tax would now be going into funneling into creating more media alternatives, for example, into providing rehabilitation camps, for example, and healthcare facilities for the very poor, because that shows that we do care, right? Number one, that is an effective re-employment of that money, that's supposedly social money, right? And in that sense, we are using that money in a morally correct way. But secondly, that also means that we are able to disrupt that monopoly on narrative that Duterte currently has, right? That means to say that we are able to point out that this is not in fact true, that the drug war is not the most effective way of fighting the war, of fighting drug problems, but number two, that it comes at a huge social and human cost that is incredibly harmful to your communities as a whole, right? And that this is a trend that is happening throughout the Philippines. This narrative reintroduction is what then destroys the current monopoly of truth and what creates more support for anti-drug war policies. Make sure that be very clear, Mr. Speaker, our goal here, more than toppling the regime or anything, right, is to make sure that the drug war is stopped immediately, because we think that this is what hurts the most disenfranchised within society, right? What do we mean by that, right? And we think that we need to tackle this, because the most disenfranchised in society are not just the very poor. This is something that happens within those communities, all right? We think that the most disenfranchised are the people who currently have like crippling drug addiction problems as a result of their poverty, systemically because of their poverty, right? We think that those people are now being sacrificed constantly, right? And that there is no reason why that sacrifice is going to change, right? Because other poor people are very happy to continue voting for Duterte because he has manipulated the monopoly on truth, or a monopoly on supposed truth, and because he is able to sacrifice constantly that disenfranchised population in a bid to retain power himself and claim to help other poor people. We think that by distributing and by making sure that other poor people feel the pinch of this as well, of these policies, we are able to direct attention to how these policies are ineffective. We think that that is a good thing, because that means that these people are finally emancipated from the constant, they don't constantly have to be like slaughtered like lambs, right? Like in the name of like maintaining this stability for the regime. Now, I want to talk then about this idea of a choice of the people, right? Because we think that in a democracy, we have to talk about whether or not like this is a free choice, or whether or not like, the people deserve the choice to keep Duterte in power, right? We think that the reason why, firstly, very obviously, the current choice of the poor to keep Duterte in power, I think, is a coerced choice. This is because, one, like I mentioned before, there is a monopoly on truth, but two, because of things that are very viscerally important to them that are manipulated constantly, right? So this idea of crime is sensationalized, right? This idea of drugs is sensationalized to make it look like an enemy, to make it look like something that you can gun down. And that is a rhetoric that is very nice and tempting for poor people, because it's easy to believe that your problems don't need systemic, slow change, but rather can just be shot down, right, at a gun or by a death squad. Right? It's easier to believe that, and people continue clinging on to that belief. We think that that belief is extremely pernicious because of the very lands that it ends up slaughtering, right? That's why we need to change that belief. We think that any belief that exists as such is, one, cruel, and therefore secondary to the free interests of those people, because of the other people that you're fucking over as a result of it, but secondly, also because like that very choice is coerced by a constant media monopoly and constant media repetition that forces you to barter away those people, right? That means that your choice to make that choice is not a free choice and not a valid choice because of people that you're hurting as a result of that, right? We think that the only way in which we can combat that and create some kind of actual freedom of choice is, one, by using that tax money to present some kind of alternative to like Duterte's hold, right? And to disrupt the monopoly of truth, but also to make sure that this that there is a clearer presentation of like the actual alternatives that poor people have to Duterte, right? And his drug war, most importantly. I think that for all these reasons, we're very happy to propose.
Speech DP and dialogue.
Your moral obligation as a progressive in the Philippines has to be tied down on whether or not the decisions you make out of that moral obligation will actually help the agenda that you as a progressive wants to put in. So side opening government can talk about how people are coerced, how people don't actually know the extent of their full information, as a result that cannot make proper decisions. They cannot just say that they cannot simply support Rodrigo Duterte if they cannot prove how practically this would mean that the war on drugs will end a lot quicker. If we can prove to you that not only will the war on drugs prolong and be exaggerated even more under their world, but if the ability for a progressive politician to ever step into power in the future will be decreased on their side, then we think that the agenda of the progressive movement will die down, and we think that's when your moral obligation will be all for naught. But before that, three issues of rebuttals. The first is the idea about companies and corporations, because the first thing they wanted to say was that these corporations will still take a lot of time before they can officially shut down. So the thing is, even if they consider it takes a long time, this still means that they consider it will happen even in the future. So Pratibha's argument will still stand, but will happen later on. So I don't think they took that down completely. But the second thing, that if this is true, right, then I would think even if this is true and it takes quite a while for them to actually close down these corporations, I think even then, as a progressive politician that would want to take funding from these companies, they're less likely to want to take funding from these areas if these companies are already going to be labeled as people that are civilly disobedient, or people that are not complying with the ways that the rules that the government's placed there. We think it will become a political risk for you to accept funding from these groups of people if you know that you would also be labeled as someone that is not following the laws and rules that the Philippines have been set then. The second issue is the idea about how Rodrigo Duterte does not prioritize social welfare, blah, 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 and all that. I think maybe this may not be his top priority at this point, but we think that this idea of like elevating poverty and helping poor people is still a large part of his agenda and his political character. We think like the idea that he sold the fact that he can rebuild Davao City from where it was a few years ago and rebuild it to something that's so rich proves is something that he used within his political agenda for quite a lot, right? The fact that he sold himself as an average guy that came from a very rural area is the fact that he's always going to be tied down with the ability for him to elevate poverty. So even if it's not his top priority, the fact that he has to make sure that there are certain means that he fulfills his political agenda. In the moment he does not do that, that's when he loses political credibility. So I think that's incentive enough from him to continue social welfare or to make sure that poverty ends. But even if this is true, even if it's true that it's not his top priority, then isn't it more to say, like, say his top priority is like this war on drugs and his death squad, then wouldn't that just also, with that logic, wouldn't that just prove that he is more likely to shift his resources or the limited resources that he has now under their world to funding the death squad even more as compared to giving more social welfare as true that his top priority. So even then, if it's true that his top priority is the death squad, then we think it's a complete hard for them to limit those resources. If now he has to choose which one I have to give, I cannot give both. I would rather fuel the one that I prioritize most. So we don't think it's a valid response. Take a seat, both of you. The last response is all their alternatives. This idea there's a lot of media alternatives, that they will make rehab facilities and all that. This sounds really nice when they say it then, but we don't think Rodrigo Duterte will let them off so easy. We think no, that in the Philippines, you still have a lot, like the government still has access to the most successful media outlets, the ones that have the most money, the ones that have the largest outreach. So even then, if they want to say they have other media outlets, alternatives, they would be there'll be lower quality, there'll be ones that would have smaller outreach. But more, I think worse so, that's when Rodrigo Duterte is more likely to amp up on the coercion that happens within these media outlets. They're more likely to make sure that you have more propaganda. They're more likely to make sure that you have things that are always pro-government and would always clamp down on these people more. So we think they would exaggerate in their harms then to exaggerate in their harms then, and the fact that they are more powerful goes to show that they're more likely to want to clamp down. But the last thing is about this idea about people making like this rehab thing. We think they're not going to make it easy for people to have access to these rehab facilities. They're going to have higher restrictions on making rehab facilities. The governments are going to buy plots of land so that these people cannot build in these areas. They're going to put death squads into these areas. So that means that poor people will be too scared to enter these regions if they know that they could be shot down by someone part of the death squad. We think these are a bunch of ways that Rodrigo Duterte can that would make it a lot harder from accessing all the platforms that they want to give. And I don't think they can. We don't think that benefit is large in there. But before that, I would love to. Oh no, sorry, opening it.
Okay. Now, if that is true, and if Rodrigo Duterte does start clamping down these rehab centers, wouldn't it become appallingly obvious to the poor that Rodrigo Duterte is prioritizing?
Correct. It doesn't matter if they say that you're putting to it. Even if it becomes more clear, the ability for you to access a rehab center is like it's like really small, right? If you put all these death squads there, if you literally limit the amount of services that it can provide. So even if they are for sure that, right, even if they know that Rodrigo Duterte is a bad person, they still cannot access that rehab center. They cannot prove to us why that is true. My first argument: why will you prolong the war on drugs as a result of it? We think Pratibha already explained to you that this war on drugs is not fueled by the death squad or like the police. We think think in the Philippines, it's more like this. That's what it's more of a means of propaganda. We think a majority of the extrajudicial killings that happen on the ground by people who are like poor that also agree that their neighborhood is not safe, or just people that generally believe that you should not, that these drug dealers should die and there is no other way. And the reason why this is so, the reason why this sentiment is so strong on the ground is because Duterte relies on two narratives. The first of this narrative is that he says that there is no other way to fix the problem, that you must resort to extrajudicial killings. And the second is that they often attack liberal demographic for calling them elitist, for calling them privileged and progressive, and people who are rich. And because of these two things, we think under your world, the moment that a progressive person and a progressive community chooses not to pay taxes, these narratives increase even more. What do I mean by this? We think now the government can say, I have a limited pool of money, and the reason why I have a limited pool of money is because progressive individuals are not paying. That's when they can say, practically, I cannot give you social welfare, I cannot give you rehab facilities that are government funded because I don't have enough money. That's when they're more likely to say that this war on drugs and extrajudicial killings is literally the only alternative that you can take because I don't have money to give other ways that these progressive people want. But secondly, they're more likely to antagonize these liberals, the liberal demographic, by calling them people who aren't following the rules, who aren't being part of the government, but they're more likely to give them a label that are literally saying that these are the most richest, the most elitist individuals, and the moment that they choose not to pay taxes, that's when you are affected. As a result of that, blame would not be shifted to Rodrigo Duterte himself, but will be shifted to the liberal demographics. And as a result of that, the moment the progressive movement as a whole is tainted as someone that will not help the poor individuals, that's when the larger conservative community that has already supported Rodrigo Duterte will never flip to the other side and possibly vote in for another politician. That's when you're not likely to get support to a progressive politician that may rise in power, because now people can say that this politician is supporting a community that will not help us and will not elevate our poverty. We would rather stick with Rodrigo Duterte, who allows us to kill an individual if it means that my community becomes a lot safer.
Unfortunately, for the opening half of this debate, we think the heart of this motion lies in assessing what constitutes a moral obligation for an individual. And we think in closing government, we are going to give you a 5-reason explanation for why we think this is an obligation independent of the outcomes in this debate. I have 2 things in extension material. First, I'm going to prove that there's a moral obligation inherently to these individuals and they must exercise it independent of the consequences of it. Second, I'll talk about why we actually mobilize a strong progressive bloc, the only opposition in Philippines that we think is necessary. We agree with the opening, withholding taxes has a benefit in terms of paying money into like progressive media companies, but we think that is less of a focus because I will explain to you why we actually get political change directly. First, what constitutes a moral obligation? Unfortunately, we think no one in this debate has assessed why this person or this community has a unique obligation to withhold taxes per se. We say there are 4 reasons for why. First, we think is their capacity. These individuals come from urban populations with highly educated access to liberal values and opinions. They have access to information and knowledge that is the most liberating factor in deciding political futures, their legacies, who to vote for, and who to align themselves with. Given this privilege and this capacity, we think they have the unique capacity to decide where their money ought to go, where their money ought not to go. They also have access to where to put their money and where not to put their money, where they have offshore accounts, where not to put money into areas where they can use that money for better interests. Given this, we think they are in a unique capacity, and therefore we think they have a duty of care to people who don't have this capacity, the poorer people who didn't get the education that they did. They were all victims of birth lotteries that gave them this specific capacity to do so. But second, we think they're in a position of influence. If you're a progressive within Philippines, you live in an urban Manila, you live in Quezon City, you live in areas with high capacity to increase, for example, international organization, trade, your educational facilities. You have an influence to exert power. We think you withholding money means that you can use that money in ways where your influence is directly controlled. The comparative on the opposition world is a world in which that money goes to a politician or a community that you have no control over where that money goes to. So we think on the second layer, that is a moral obligation. But third, we think you are complicit. If you pump money into the Duterte regime, probably there will be some education. I'm going to agree. Maybe we say that is true. But a vast amount of money is pumped funding propaganda, putting money into death squad. Every ounce of money you earn from your elitist educated circle, you are pumping into creating more and more debts. We say that money is literally blood money. If in the worst case it comes from a conservative person, that is preferable than that money coming from your pocket, considering you claim to be a liberal. But the fourth reason we say is resistance. Like, look, evil thrives on evil being unopposed. In a world in which conservatism has money, has a death squad, has propaganda, it is easier for an average Filipino who doesn't have a political leaning to say, I'm probably going to be conservative. That's the winning side. In a world in which there is resistance, the progressive movement has capital, has the capacity to withhold their support to a Duterte regime. There is more reason for an average Filipino to say that is a fighting chance. We say if you can resist, you must resist because evil thrives on it being unopposed. But the last reason we say there's obligation is because in an alternate world, conservatives are using their obligation for themselves. Conservatives pump money into lobbying, they pump money into the regime. Why are you pumping money into the same thing they want to? So we say these 5 reasons means there is a moral obligation independent of the outcomes in this debate. What is the only reason we had in the opening opposition? Reciprocity. I'm going to talk about reciprocity for a moment. The first thing I'm going to suggest is there is no such thing. I don't know what world you live in where Philippines has free education, has access to huge amounts of capital for the poorer people. It is corruption, it is infrastructure to pump money to debt squad, it's propaganda machines. There is no infrastructure worth defending. But even if there is education, there is beautiful healthcare, and everyone is happy, and some of them are dying. We say this is a trade-off. Less people can have education if it meant more and more people not dying on the streets of the Philippines because of their victimization. We say there's a reciprocal duty to save people as opposed to becoming more and more elite because of this random infrastructure that you say exists. The analogy here is you wouldn't ask black people to pump money into a white school because it helps the community, it harms them. It's not a reciprocal duty. Right, second part of my extension, progressive movements. According to the opening opposition, progressives are going to get the shit. They're going to get the shit because now poor people of Philippines, Duterte's whole legacy is built on the fact that I'm your man, I want to defend you, I want to give you infrastructure. Let's talk. I think this premise has been assumed by the opening up that Duterte is on the rise. His power is so strong that if we do this, he's going to increase all the support. Let's talk about the Duterte legacy. First of all, we think he won the election on a margin. The first past the post system in the Philippines meant he won it. But the English word to say very closely to the next person, also because it was heavily moved aside because of the other candidates that existed. So it wasn't a popular vote. Second, Duterte currently is losing because the poor people that he says he was the average man for don't have any of the benefits that happened in Davos. When Davos existed and when he was rich, it was because he stifled out corruption. He tried to be a better governor, but when he got into national power, he didn't do anything of the side. There's political gridlock. He removed Lenny Robredo from a cabinet of ministers. His legacy is dwindling. He screwed over Trump. Duterte is at his weakest. If we take money away from him, progressives won't get the shit for it. Duterte will, because literally the only thing he has left for him is his money to pump propaganda. So I'm not going to let the opening up get away by suggesting that if we do this, Duterte is going to become stronger. He becomes weaker. But the second thing they say is, look, Duterte will become more punishing. He will make the decision to pump more money into into death squads. This is ridiculous. Like in a world in which you have very limited political capital and you want to maintain power, the first position you need to do is to assure everyone that you are indeed for them. So they will remove money from death squads and things that kill people to the propaganda machine that keeps him in power. So the worst case of the open opposition, and if I believe all their characterization, that Duterte is a man of the people by propaganda, we will take money away from killing people and put money into the propaganda machine that keeps him in power. Which is the last part of my extension. We say the progressive movement will inherently become better. We agree with opening that we think there's a need to fund free media and there's a need for progressive movements to be stronger. But look, in the Philippines, the reason why they're losing is twofold. First, people don't have trust in the progressive movement. Either they have the Lenny Robredo campaign, which is oftentimes a VP that's not very powerful, or the progressives are elite. They're elite. They pay taxes. They claim that they want to have protests, but they don't make any changes. In a world in which the progressive movement is fine with withholding money, it seems to have capital. It seems to be a movement that is in opposition to Duterte with their own control. We think more and more international organizations are likely to support them. More individuals are likely to join the progressive movement because they are seen as individuals with actual bite. In the opposition world, when they protest, when they have campaigns with no money, with organizations with no capital to do much, we think you lose progressive crowds. And in that world, conservatives will get stronger because every time they point to a progressive, it doesn't have need to run its own campaign. We say it is in this world that the movement becomes less weak. We say on those two grounds, closing of government takes its way.
I'm going to start by pointing out something that I find it's strange that nobody has pointed this out yet. Tax evasion is a crime, and it is a crime for good reasons. We don't think that just because, they want to invent some sort of crazy narrative, we're going to have a poor uprising and literally pull Duterte out of his throne suddenly means that tax evasion is a great thing to do. I'm glad that Amrit started out his speech by saying that this ought to be a debate about moral obligations. Thank you, Amrit. So let's first engage with them. Our opening extension is really diametrically opposed to that. So we're going to argue essentially that progressives in the Philippines aren't only loyal to individuals or to the lowest common denominator, but at the heart of the progressive movement, at the heart of liberalism, Mr. Speaker, is this notion that all individuals ought to have some degree of choice and some degree of opportunity within society. And we think that democracy forms a necessary tenet of that structure. And that's very often the reason why liberals, for example, would like everybody to vote. It's a reason why liberals believe everybody should have as much freedom as possible. So we think that to the extent where at least half the Filipino people explicitly voted for Duterte in favor of these types of policies, then at the point where the liberals choose to subvert the political process, to make an attack on democracy itself by trying to hold the entire nation of Philippines hostage by withholding their money, then that's not only an assault on Duterte, that's an assault on the principles of democracy itself, right? So we think that that's the reason why it's something that is morally abhorrent. Amri came up to us and said, the reason why the liberals do it is because A, they're willing to, and B, they're able to, right? But we don't think that that represents a moral justification for the act. We don't think that it's fair for her to simply say, we don't give a shit about the repercussions and outcomes of this action. Right? We don't think that it's reasonable for the liberal movement to simply act without considering what the ramifications of those actions are going to be, right? But yes, Amrit.
So Duterte was elected. We got half the vote, like 33%, in a world in which there was high propaganda and clamping down on minority voters. Can you tell me how that is the democracy that
criticisms of the electoral system do not mean that this electoral system's results are always going to be wrong, right? We think there are mechanisms and ways in which electoral systems can be changed over time. Just because you didn't like the outcome of election doesn't mean you can suddenly blame the system, right? It's a liberal thing. Oh, electoral college means the election result. I don't believe that, right? But let's move on to this idea of material outcomes, right? Let's look at what the average dictator would do in this country. We already have the characterization set up first that Duterte leans very heavily on this image of being a tough guy, of being law and order, and not letting anybody stand in his way. So let's examine first things first. What am I going to do as a president if all of these CEOs and corporate leaders all of a sudden are starting to pull tax evasion? First thing I'm going to do is run an audit, find out who's been evading taxes, and then I'm going to put all of these guys in prison and then proceed to install my own cronies in the heads of those corporations. Right? You don't think that just because tax evasion is being done by the CEO means we need to shut down the machine that manufactures shampoo. That's clearly not the case. We think that at the point where we find there's a tax evasion, we put this particular individual in jail, take away a lot of the support from the liberal movement that way, and then after that install my own guys, and the company can proceed to make money. And the second layer to that is that nothing the USA or any other country can do, because it's very clearly stated already that tax evasion is a crime, making it very difficult for anyone to come out and say, you're being unfair, you're being cruel. No, like people in every country, even like I guess in Scandinavia, if you evade crime, you're probably going to jail, right? But let's examine what really happens like on the ground at the point where the liberals begin to do this. I think Carrie did a lot of work pointing out like how Duterte would do it. We want to be a little bit more specific, because given that Amri already said the characterization that Duterte is strongest in his image and his military arms, then we think that what Duterte is going to do is leverage on the image some more. It's going to perform more in what he's stronger at. So it's going to proceed to catch more of these liberals. It's going to proceed to use a corporate machine that is already engineered to continue villainizing these individuals. And we think that even if Mithrun and Hari is like, this will respond to them. Even if Mithrun and Hari is like sudden liberal propaganda machine really comes to fruition, they are still going to be forced to admit that yes, liberals are taking money away from the country. And we think that it's going to be very easy for Duterte to justify harsh punishments against individuals, because what they are essentially doing is they are becoming traitors to the country within an ultra-nationalist state. We think it's going to be very easy for individuals to blame them. But let's then look at the responses of the poor, right? What's the narrative going to be for those individuals who actually have who actually have this welfare being taken away from them. So we think that, first of all, like these individuals are very likely to blame the liberals instead of Duterte, right? Because these are the people who are literally withholding the money. But we think the second thing that's problematic, and so we respond to OG as well, is that the entire case is necessarily contingent on increasing the suffering borne by the poor. They want to say, we'll twist the screws in, we'll fuck them harder until they cannot take it, and then they're going to proceed for uprising. So we think that, first of all, it's morally abhorrent to use these individuals as like these tools so the liberals can sit in their offices, reap the benefits of increased personal income, and meanwhile use these poor people to absorb bullets. I'd like to point out the likelihood of that being successful is also extremely low, given the fact that the Philippines has got a lot of practice with putting down this type of revolution, right? But we think that, next of all, at the point where these liberals start to take money away from the state, it's going to be very easy for Duterte to say, look, this is actively a threat to our national security. When you have things like your Moral Islamic Liberation Front, when you have things like ISIS knocking on the door, it becomes very easy for Duterte then to spin a narrative that these individuals are actively sabotaging the continued existence of the Filipino people as a nation, right? It's going to make these liberal individuals extremely unpopular. But the last thing I'm going to talk about is he actually going to take away funding from this police and this military, right? I think, first of all, no, it's very difficult to retrench a policeman, right? I think that in many countries, these like civil servants, all that, very hard to retrench, have very strong benefits and unions, right? But second of all, we think that these individuals form the core of Duterte's power base, right? If Duterte actually cuts down on this police thing, he's likely to be losing more followers than he gains, right? Then follows that his political calculus and strategy isn't going to favor that particular approach. So we think that what's going to end up happening is the liberals are at the end of the day going to be a lot more villainized at the end, right? But next thing I want to talk about is whether or not, is whether or not like this, how we're actually going to create change on the comparative. We think that to the extent that these individuals in the real world, and Andre already pointed out that Duterte here is at his weakest, then we think that we have no need for such a policy. Right? We're better able to allow these liberals who are already CEOs, already managers, to use whatever the power they have in society, whatever leverage they have now, which is comparatively more than what they had when they're in jail, to actually change these things by a means that is more morally permissible for liberal people. And we think that what they're going to be able to do is try and change hearts and minds rather than holding the entire country ransom. So we're talking about your campaigns, your rallies, etc., etc. They might say it's going to be slow, it's not going to be as effective, but we think we prefer lasting change and sustainable change to no change at all. Very, very proud to oppose.
If no one stands, evil seems impenetrable. If you give evil money, that's when more drug wars are likely to multiply, to fester. We think that happens all on the opposition side. I'll first look at what Amrit brought to you in closing government uniquely before moving on to the speaker reforming and then taking out opening opposition as well. Because let's look at the links that specifically came out in closing government. While there were a huge amount of outcomes that came from the opening government and some characterization about like these individuals being more privileged and having more access, the link that came from Amrit was that there's a unique duty of care. That as a result of that characterization, you are the only ones that are capable and have the capacity to do it, that you are the only one with the influence, that you doing what the opposition does means that the blood is on your hands, essentially blood money when you don't evade taxes. We think that the evil thrives as a result of a lack of opposition and looking like the losing side, the one that pays the money. Essentially, these are like principles that when unresponded to by the opposition side, we think that a lot of the arguments that come from Amrit still left standing. But here's what I deal with the speaker reforming. The most recent thing that he says is that you essentially have to win the hearts and minds of people. It's about what spin in the narrative. But let's look at a comparison, right? Either you spin it as a spin these liberals as a threat, being dangerous to the country, which we think that like means that there's an actual reason to believe that there's opposition that can actually win out in this fight against Duterte, versus their alternative. Their alternative is the one that looks at the losing side without capital, that looks at the losing side that's constantly funding into the same principles that like the conservatives or like these supporters do, like currently do. The reason why vigilantes go out on the streets to actually like catch these who they believe to be drug addicts to begin with is because they fear the government. They believe that if the government is so strong, let me act first before the government catches me instead. This means that they believe that there's no escape from this. And a huge reason because of that, the huge reason behind that is because they believe that there's no opposition side that is capable of allowing them to escape. But if the opposition now has capital, now has an ability to fight and to show that they're actually that's actually an alternative, they're less likely to do these things, and you're actually winning the spin on our side compared to yours. The weakest people are more likely to side with the winning side if you don't allow them to have an alternative. So like if it's about the spin, we spin it better. But here's where we also say that essentially what the Duterte has done is bastardize democracy, and therefore liberals must go against this principle. Because the reason that Jordan explains to you is that liberals are essentially like trying to like go against the whole democratic system. But first of all, like Duterte wasn't like hugely popular. He only won because of the first past the post. Like he literally didn't even have half the people voting for him. But like that also assumes that your valiant principles of democracy weren't first used as an oppressive tool to gaslight these individuals. It was used as the propaganda. Your democracy isn't all pure and fair. Why should we defend a bastardized version of democracy? But we also say that essentially what he used was electoral challenges, all these false facts. We think that essentially we must take him down because of the principles of democracy rather than actually the alternative that he says is true. But before I move on to why like essentially this whole prison idea is also better on our side than theirs, sure.
So if the whole electoral system is screwed up, that means that every president before Duterte we can just throw out because it wasn't fair, because we did. Like,
oh my god! But look, Duterte in particular was a violent and gaslighting dictator. It's essentially harmful to the whole system of democracy. If it's like a variety of different kinds of presidents, essentially we want to take this one down. But here's where we say that this idea about like prisons through auditing these individuals. Like look, the bureaucracy in Philippines is terrible. If they have less money, it's even worse. They're less likely to be able to audit us and less likely to be able to actually put us in jail. But we're also privileged individuals, like what we already characterized in the closing government. Essentially, you can offshore these accounts. It's easy for these individuals to evade taxes, and much easier than protesting. That's when you actually go to jail and more likely to actually be physically harmed. But we also say if you enter into jail, that's where it's also powerful for you. When you actually look like the victims, like Pussy Riot essentially garnered the international attention as a result of being the ones that were freedom fighters, but were sent to jail. This means that you actually have more power on the outside, where Duterte currently has literally no friends in the international circuit. Essentially, this means that if he's like, even if the drug war was premised on the idea of the common man, if you take away that premise of helping the common man who have less money to do now, we essentially take down Duterte because it's less support and less power. We also say that essentially people hate Duterte. We don't need to get support. Like the more you go to jail, the more power you have on your side. But let's look at this whole tangent that came from the opening side. Sit down. Essentially, what the opening side debated was like this house believes that progressives in Philippines should fund like progressive media. Essentially, what we're saying is that the outcomes that come from the opening opposition, both the opening houses, were like should be independent from the moral obligation. What we are saying in the closing government side is that this moral obligation is essential, regardless of how the outcome comes, or what the outcome comes to. But we even say that we win that clash against the opening opposition side, because regardless of whether or not we depend on this like liberal media, essentially the alternative is a lot worse from the opening opposition side, because they're dependent on corporations, they're dependent on protests, and they're dependent on being disruptive and violent. This means that the outcome that like Katrina tried to explain about how like liberal politicians would never get into power, that happens worse on their side. If you are disruptive and violent and literally can be seen and spun as a violent violent movement, you're less likely to get your liberal politicians, or even that outcome doesn't actually happen. Essentially, the outcome of evading taxes means that you have more capital on your side, and that essentially you seem less like the losing side, and you seem more of a threat to the Duterte. The problem right now is that we don't seem like a threat. We seem like the ones that are weaker, that he literally can use his strongman narrative that you say was so powerful to say that we are weaker, to clamp down even more on the liberals and like completely ignore the social welfare of the poorest of the poor. Essentially, if we think that you must give an alternative to actually choosing the side, but regardless, that blood shouldn't be on our hands. Regardless of the outcome, what you do when you funnel money into these drug wars is that you are complicit. Not only that, you had the capacity to actually make the changes that you believed so strongly when you called yourself a progressive. You can't be the ones that have these high up fair and like elitist principles, but at the same time choose not to act and choose to be more and more complicit in this regime.
Thank you for the helpful.
If the drug war to an extent is already supported by vigilantes who essentially do it for free for the government, right, due to their love and compassion and for the loyalty of the government, then it's then to say that Duterte's power is still then very strong within the Philippines, right? This means that all what CG talked about regarding liberals won't be pointed to blame, liberals will always be like the perfect person to be able to look up to, is false, because all of us here also hate rich people, right? So who in their right mind would then listen to these rich people who evade tax, who are considered criminals, who are federal convicts, who do not want to pay tax to the government, even if they're citizens of the Philippines, means that people suddenly believe them, or people suddenly go into their rehab centers and whatnot. So this means that if they wanted to also talk about moral action which is not taking into account consequences, it's false. Because all these moral actions and moral obligations need to understand the consequences of the decisions that they make. And hence, more so, that if they wanted to prove all of their answers regarding how to improve and alleviate the poor people and also these druggies who want to live their own life in the Philippines, right, is then false. Two issues in this debate. First, do taxes mean complicity of the liberal left, the death squad, and where do we then successfully change the narrative? Sit down. In a case where Jordan has talked to you about how using these rich people leverages to be able to then influence the people in your own company, or to be able to ask them to tell their own families regarding how the liberal progression thinks that Duterte, what he's doing is wrong, I think it's a correct resistance move. Whereas you not paying taxes and you not doing your own duty towards the people, first, it's really a clash with the principle of the liberal left, and second, it's a matter of fact that you are not doing the double effect. When you take these taxes away, people get hungry, and this is the reason why you cannot do this to make all people hungry. Hence, when you also talk about like how it's in your capacity to do so, but when we talk about how these people are painted as criminals by the government, there's lesser capacity to then make change. What is your priority? Second, you talk about how influence can be directly controlled when they fund their own media. Problem is that cronies of Duterte will still be very strong, and you consider to the high propaganda that they have. And second, as a liberal left, you're literally telling people and cherry picking which presidency that you want to support. This means that as conservatives, they will get more angry the fact that you say that Duterte isn't necessarily the best person to rule the Philippines just because he kills people, and extrajudicial killings is bad in the concept of human rights. This means that liberal left will be seen more as evils and criminals because they are the ones who are not supporting these poor people's ideal and keep on clashing with them regarding their own choice in the democracy. Then who will even successfully access to the liberal media when all the propaganda has been controlled by Duterte's cronies? Third, I want to talk about complicity. So then, if the poor people in this like Quezon City who are not living in Manila, who pay GST, who pay taxes, who pay land tax, are they then still complicit within all these crimes that happen? The only solution to complicity is when you move out of the state and not become a Filipino member, Filipino citizen is when you then directly disengage yourself with the idea of how the government is then ruling you. The matter of fact is that even if they wanted to fund things into channels of like rehab centers and alternative whatsoever, why can't you pay taxes and do this at the same time is the main question, right? And so why was suddenly taxes then give them so much money to then suddenly start all these rehab centers or suddenly be successful? What if Duterte just puts a gunman there and then keeps shooting people who come right? Also, all these things, they are done without they are doing all of this and making all these arguments without really assessing the nature of the state, to how powerful Duterte is when it comes to his rule in the Philippines. They say that it's a matter of resistance, that it's a matter of how people will have to fight the evil. The problem is that right now, when rich people and rich liberals have their own leverage within their own companies and their own money and not painted as federal criminals by the government, this means that they have more leverage to change as a form of resistance in this case. On their own OG, what they want to say was Duterte got elected because he hates drug dealers. And I think this is the main point that we go back to. That that's why will be the last to go. Because even if you don't pay taxes, Duterte will always fund the death squad because this is why he got voted in, this is why he got elected, and this is why the people believe in him. And when it comes to public amenities, these poor people always constantly blame the liberals for still driving around Manila, or still enjoying their life at clubs, and when they don't even pay taxes if they're not caught by the government. Hence, who suffers the brunt here? Second is that they are rich, but it does not equate to influence in the Philippines. I think it's a very big logical leap. Just because they have money and they pump into all these agencies doesn't necessarily mean that people can access these agencies. And more so when they are seen as liberal left and they want to gain their legitimacy within the community, I think it's a false move for them, as Shona have talked to you about, as to how these people need to use their own leverage as of now, and not seen as people who blame everyone else just for the choices of presidents that they make that should not be just not in line with their own principles by itself. But before that, opening.
Okay, the poor are constantly bartering away the most disenfranchised drug afflicted amongst them. As a progressive, why should I prioritize the principles of democracy over the only possible way to emancipate these disenfranchised?
Because I think the poor people still voted Duterte in for the main reason, right? They really fucking hated him, right? So this is the main thing, right? In democracy, the majority of voices are listened to, and sure that the liberal might be a small pocket that believes in all these rights that poor people are then harming their own community and whatsoever. But if they honestly feel like the problem is then drug dealers within their own community, and you then tell them that you are wrong, then what you're believing is wrong, that Duterte is actually essentially not helping you to elevate your own social status. If social status is not elevating social status is not their priority, and it's killing drug dealers, what's wrong with that, right? So this is where when the liberal community wants to enter and to change all these narratives, we say that in the second issue that we on Science CO do it better. First, they say that these liberals, they say that then you can what they can say towards these liberals is that they're saying that you're choosing things wrongly, and then why would you ever respect a criminal? This means that everyone else will never ever listen to these liberals, because all you're doing is that you're practicing things within your own right and not considering the consequences towards the poor people. Second is that they said they wanted to channel money into these correct places and direct attention to the drug war policies. I think all of these things can be done by awareness, by using protesting and due process, as compared to just evading tax overall. I think the point of evading tax as painted out by the government is way too easy to then let us understand as like what tax evasion how tax evasion necessarily impacts the state. I think they undermine the idea that when tax evasion is a literal white-collar crime that is the most frowned upon, as to how they will then forward their own agenda when it comes to their image being tarnished. Because the premise is that when the liberal agenda image is then tarnished, then there will be no one to listen to them, especially in a case and state where all this propaganda is then supported by their own cronies and Duterte and vigilantes who have a loyal following towards Duterte. I think according to a dictatorship, we must then act a lot more smarter and strategic as compared to just not paying taxes and thinking they were complacent just because they pay taxes. I think when it came in the point that liberals say that the taxes is due to the duty of the people, I think you have to do this duty to the Filipino people first and let them survive and go through a due process to be able to resist this Duterte campaign if they really wanted to. They shouldn't paint themselves as criminals, or they shouldn't evade taxes, because this means that they go against their own principle and they go against their own conscience. Thank you.
Let's wait outside.
Thank you.